Today, we're diving into a really tough but incredibly important topic: human trafficking. We're going to follow the data to understand the true scale of what has become a modern crisis. To really grasp the seriousness here, let's start with this quote. It calls modern bondage among the gravest violations of human rights. Just let that sink in for a second. That one phrase really sets the stage for everything we're about to unpack. So, this brings up some really big questions, doesn't it? What does this crisis actually look like on the ground? And maybe the most critical question of all, why does it seem to be getting worse? To get our heads around this, let's start with the sheer scale of the problem. A new report lays out some pretty sobering numbers that really help put things into perspective. Okay, let's look at this number. Nearly 146,000. That's how many people have made the dangerous journey from Southwest Asia to Europe through irregular routes. And that's just in the last 5 years. It's so much more than a statistic, isn't it? Behind that number are countless individual stories of risk and desperation. And this isn't some static issue that's just staying the same. No way. The number of people arriving has actually tripled in only 4 years. It jumped from about 13,000 back in 2020 to a projected 39,000 this year. A rise that dramatic tells you that whatever is pushing people to leave, it's intensifying. So, who are we talking about here? Where are people coming from? Well, if you look at the data from 2020 to 2023, the largest group, 41%, came from Bangladesh. Right behind them, people from Afghanistan made up about a third of the total. So you can see how these specific routes are impacting certain populations much more than others. And you can see major world events reflected right here in the numbers. For instance, just last year, the percentage of arrivals from Afghanistan shot up to 42%. And that's no coincidence. It happened right after the Taliban returned to power. It's such a clear, direct line between political instability and people feeling they have no choice but to flee. So the numbers tell us what's happening. But now we have to ask the really important question: why? What is the human motivation behind these statistics? Why are so many people willing to risk everything? Yeah, it's the crucial question, isn't it? What on earth drives a person to leave everything they know for a journey that's so incredibly dangerous? Well, it turns out the data points to a pretty clear answer. Take a look at this figure: 68%. That's the share of Pakistani migrants in one survey who all pointed to the very same core reasons for leaving home. And here are those reasons: a fundamental lack of employment and a lack of basic services. You see, for so many, this isn't a choice for a better life. It's a desperate flight from a life that feels like it has no prospects at all. And that desperation, well, it creates a vulnerability that traffickers are experts at exploiting. But here's the thing: they can only operate so effectively when the system itself is flawed. And this brings us to the problem of impunity. So what do we mean by a culture of impunity? It's when criminals, and particularly officials who might be complicit, know they can act without facing any real consequences. This creates a permissive environment where exploitation can just flourish. And this pattern of inaction, it's officially documented. According to the U.S. State Department, for 5 consecutive years, Pakistan has failed to take significant action against officials complicit in trafficking. A pattern like that sends a very clear message: this crime is not being taken seriously at an official level. It's not just a lack of will, either. It's also about weaknesses in the laws themselves. Legal ambiguities and just plain poor enforcement. They create loopholes that traffickers can easily slip through. And here's a perfect example of a critical flaw. In Pakistan, the law actually allows convicted traffickers to pay a fine instead of facing mandatory time in prison. When you think about the huge profits from trafficking, a fine isn't a deterrent. It's just a cost of doing business. So if that's the problem, what is the path forward? How can these vast transnational trafficking networks actually be dismantled? The UN has offered a really powerful framework with this year's theme. The key is to stop thinking about trafficking as just a series of isolated incidents and start treating it for what it is: a form of highly organized crime. So what does that approach look like in practice? Well, it means tackling the problem from all sides. You need critical reforms to the laws themselves. You absolutely must have robust protection and support for victims. Then you need better training for security agencies, and this is huge, adequate funding to actually go after these networks. And since this is a global problem, you need much stronger cooperation between countries. It really has to be a comprehensive, victim-centered fight. And that brings us to our final thought. The data paints a clear picture of the crisis. The necessary steps to combat it are pretty well defined. The only question that's left is a difficult one. Is the political and social will truly there to protect the vulnerable and finally end this exploitation? That's what we have to consider.